Hello everyone, I'm joined today with Kathrine and Emily, who have very kindly come along and joined me for our annual event, which is on transition from primary school to secondary school this year. So what I'll do first of all is I'll get Kathrine and Emily to introduce themselves. So Kathrine, did you want to introduce yourself first?
Hi Leanne, thanks for inviting us today. So I'm Kathrine Everrett, I'm the Education and Inclusion Service Manager in the North East, which really means I support North East schools in providing additional support for children with needs in the North East.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And Emily, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Emily Gaunt. I'm the Deputy Area Lead of the North East STIPS team, and our STIPS team, that stands for Specialist Teachers for Inclusive Practice. We are a team of teachers who work in mainstream schools to support children with additional needs, going right from our littlest ones in nursery to some of our bigger children at the top of some of our secondary schools.
Brilliant, thank you so much. It's great to have you both here actually, because it gives that kind of two different but almost perspectives, doesn't it, of you know, the transition from primary to secondary. So thank you so much. So I've got some questions for you both. I think the first ones are more for you, Kathrine. And I think just the purpose of us doing this is really to give parents who are starting to think about that transition period, or perhaps are in the process of it or have just gone through it, just to give them a little bit of understanding and preparation and that kind of stuff. And so we've got lots of videos going on throughout the week with all different aspects of it, because it's a really daunting time, isn't it, as a parent.
It is. And it's just a little bit about myth busting, isn't it? Making sure that we can let you have as much information as we can, so that there is that myth busting, so it isn't such a minefield for you guys.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So the first question is, when do the transition discussions begin and who should be involved in them?
Okay, so the child should be at the centre of any transition discussions, and we should expect that schools and families are offered transition days in the year prior to any move. So children, families and the schools involved in transition should be involved in those discussions. Any transition should start in the year before starting a new school. So for primary to secondary, this would be in year 5. And we'd expect the conversations to help between the current school and the receiving school about transition, obviously with the consent of the family. School or type of provision will be advised to the families by the national deadline of the 15th of February for children with an EHCP, or 1st of March for those without an EHCP. So there might be some of your children that are on SEND support haven't quite got an EHCP yet, so that's why I'm giving both deadlines. There is a transition timescale that's on the local offer, so I'll make sure that the link to that is shared with you, Leanne, so that you can read that out with this video. But anyone who likes using Google, you can Google choosing a school place for a child with an EHCP, and that will bring up all of the description of activity that needs to happen in the different months. I think the key date for transition, particularly this year, has been the 3rd of October. So any discussion with the case officer about your parental preference needed to have been in place by the 3rd of October. So that has passed, but the timeline does give you a better outline. So I'll make sure that that's clearly in the details that you have.
Brilliant. Thank you. It's again, that's really useful to have the dates for both, for the sort of the EHCPs and for those who don't. So that's really useful. Thank you.
No worries.
And the question that we get quite a lot that we hear is, will the local authority do a reassessment of their child's needs to ensure there is an accurate and up-to-date overview of their needs?
So as part of the Key Stage transfer process, we do prioritise annual reviews for the children going through Key Stage transfer. And as part of that annual review, advice and guidance will be collated from key professionals working with the child, including speech and language therapists, OT, EPs, any teaching staff, or any other people who are providing services to the EHCP. So rather than a reassessment, we rely on that information that's collated to provide information for the plan moving forward so that it's as up to date as it can be. So that's why we prioritise those annual reviews in year 5.
Brilliant, thank you. And what is the process of the key stage transfer, and how are parents involved in it? And who would you expect to attend as a sort of key stage transfer review?
So the process for the key stage transfer is that, as I've said, the case officer should be provided with any parental preference, and that would then be taken to the SEND admissions team for key stage transfers, and consultations will then be sent to schools where it's felt that need can be met alongside the parental preference. And it is expected that case officers do prioritise those key stage transfer annual reviews, so you would expect that they have that up-to-date information from that key stage transfer. Does that sound, did that?
Yeah, no, that's no, absolutely. Brilliant, thank you. And what do parents do if they feel their child is going to need more support than what is currently given in their plan for primary?
Okay, so transition, particularly for young people with autism and other needs, is you know, a key point of concern for families. We do understand that, and that's why we've got some work going on with our STIPS team that Emily can talk about a little bit more regarding transition. But we would expect that any changes to the plan, which effectively any increase in support or more support would be needed, would be a topic of conversation for that annual review. So it's really important that you're making sure that you're attending that annual review and you're getting your views heard. So if the families and all professionals are in agreement and the needs are not likely to be temporarily related to transition, then following the annual review, the family will be informed that the plan could be amended. And this is usually done within 4 weeks of the annual review taking place. That's the timeline, the statutory timeline. Once the intention to change a plan has been sent, the potential amendments will be discussed at EHCP governance, and one is held each week, and they're always held on a Wednesday morning. Professionals who attend the EHCP governance who will then consider those changes include speech and language therapists, EPs, area SEN representatives, and a service manager from the area, usually myself at the North East, alongside health and social care colleagues, and sometimes schools are represented. And once a decision's been made on an amendment, this will be discussed with the family. If needs are increased around transition, then we have support such as the STIPS working in collaboration with primary and secondary schools to assist schools in meeting a range of needs. And as I said, Emily will discuss this later.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've done another video on the governance board, haven't we, as well?
We
so
have,
if
yeah.
Parents want to know a little bit more about that kind of process, we'll make sure that there's a link to that video on here as well.
Sure.
For more information. So how do parents know what types of schools they should be looking at and when they should start doing it?
Okay, so the timeline that I've given you before will give parents a real detail of when those different times those different months that you need to be doing different tasks. So that's all in that timeline that I mentioned earlier. But there is also a document called Finding the Right Secondary School in Surrey. I'll make sure that's listed with the websites we offer for this video as well. But that really does offer a very comprehensive guide of what secondary schools are in place, what specialist schools and specialist centres are in place, and what the different offers are from those different schools. So I think that's a really key document for parents to get hold of.
Yeah.
And as I say, it's an electronic version, so you're welcome to get it electronically. So
brilliant. No, that sounds like a really useful tool. Because it can be quite overwhelming knowing where to start, can't it?
Absolutely. And you know, it's daunting. Any change of school is a daunting time. But what we want to do with these videos is sort of really establish what you guys need to do and how you can make it an easier process. So you know, and so it's as smooth as it can be. Yeah,
no,
so
absolutely.
you don't feel anxious about it, and then your young people don't feel anxious about it, and you know, everyone's informed and involved. So
yeah. No, definitely. It's that knowledge is power, isn't it? I think we would say. So in terms of schools, so when would the local authority start consulting with schools?
So as I've said, the 3rd of October was the deadline for preferences to be put in place. I don't want parents who haven't put an EHCP application in thinking they're disadvantaged in any way. This is just the deadline for the 15th of February. So we continue to have conversations throughout the year. But the LA will start consulting once we've got all of those recommendations in. So it's usually the latter part of the autumn term prior to the year of entry. So for this year, for 2023, it'll be October now through to November that we're doing those consultations so that we can meet that statutory deadline of the 15th of February.
Brilliant, thank you. And then something that we also hear from parents, and they never, quite know what the next steps would be. So what can parents do if they don't agree with the provision or the setting type outlined in their child's plan at the transition point?
So for me, it's really about that open and key conversations with your case officers. So you'd have had the opportunity to have that conversation in the annual review. But I think once a plan has been finalised, there are statutory duties that we have to then follow. So it would be through a tribunal process. But what we'd really want to encourage is that families have that conversation with the case officer prior to finalising and as part of that annual review process, so that all of your requirements are discussed openly. And make sure that we've got all the information we need to make an appropriate decision. Yeah, as I say, if no agreement can be reached, which we really don't want to get to that point, but if they can't, then families can appeal against sections B, F and I. So that's, needs provision and placement. So we would like to avoid that in all, if at all possible, but that is the legal route if a formal solution can't be found through the discussions with case officers.
No, brilliant. And again, we've got some other ones of these videos that we've done on the appeals process as well, which we'll pop in there as well. So thinking about that, we've talked about parents, but how are children involved in this kind of transition and key stage transfer process?
So we really want to get the voice of the child in all of this. So we want to know if a child wants to transition to a school because they want to be with their peers. So we really at Governance Board, we really love to hear the voice of the child. So however the family can present that or the school can present that, we're happy to see it. But of course, children will be involved in visits to schools, discussions around where their friends are going. They can be involved in the annual review meeting. So they can come along to the annual review meeting if that's not seen to be too difficult, and they can present their own presentation of what they're doing and what they're enjoying. So that's always really nice. We've had a couple of videos presented to us at EHCP Governance where young people have said what their needs are. It's always really fantastic to receive those. But as I say, every effort is made to find the voice of the child so that we can ensure that they're happy with the outcome as well as the family being happy with the outcome.
Brilliant. And that's so lovely to hear, because I think it's having the child's voice in whatever form it comes in is really, really important, because I think sometimes we have paperwork and stuff like that, and sometimes it's not accessible for a child. So that's really, really lovely to hear. Right, so one of the questions that, again, it comes up, sometimes there is this time where there is no suitable school place available during the consultation. So what happens in that case?
So as previously mentioned, it was sort of a one-line sentence of type would be named, but when that happens, what we'll continue to do is consult with appropriate provisions throughout the year and work with mainstream schools to enable that any reasonable adjustments, it's a legal term, but for the schools to put in place any support that might be needed to meet the needs of the children moving forward. So we continue to have conversations with specialist provisions, but also with our mainstream schools, so that can be put in place and arranged to assist in that transition in the first instance. So particularly for children and young people where the EHCP might not be finalised by March, we would want to work with the allocation from the mainstream schools allocation and potentially have further conversations with the school about what that support looks like in school. So we'll have a lot of conversations. One is about, as I say, continuing to help with appropriate provisions, but also how we work with our mainstream schools to allow that inclusion to take place. And as I say, where provision is unavailable, the plan may be finalised, naming type. And what that does is allow the family the right to appeal. So what we wouldn't want to be doing is holding up that right to appeal. So we would potentially name type, and then the parents can go through the legal first tier tribunal process. Yeah. Which again, as you've said, Jamie's done a very efficient video about a first tier tribunal, which sounds very scary and daunting, but isn't once you get into it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And actually it's really reassuring to hear that those conversations continue going on, because I think for some parents, they kind of think if at the end of the consultation period and there's no school, that's kind of it, which can be quite, you know.
No, it's ongoing. Yeah,
so it's great to hear that you know, that they sort of continue on, really there. So that's sort of all my questions for you, Kathrine. And is there anything else that you could share with families about the transition process from a kind of SEND perspective?
Yeah, I guess for me, as we've said a couple of times, it can sound daunting, but your case officer has done this before with other families and is well used to having these conversations with families and reassuring you. But I just want to reassure families that the majority of children with additional needs go through the transition process and it's smooth and efficient, the absolute majority. And if you are having difficulties with the process, assistance to support families can be found through Family Voice Surrey or Send Advice Surrey. And again, we can provide details of how to access this, but really your case officer is the first port of call, and please do feel, you know, that you can speak to them if you've got any concerns.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kathrine. I really appreciate you answering so many questions actually for this.
You're very welcome.
Brilliant. So Emily, I've got some questions for you now, which is related to your role within STIPS. So the first question, I guess, is what is the role of STIPS in the transition from primary to secondary schools?
So we are a mainstream support service. So we would be involved in transitions from children in a mainstream primary into a mainstream secondary. Some of the children who we support are transitioning into a specialist provision from a mainstream, specialist provision at secondary. And in those cases, we wouldn't be so much involved because that would be more led by the specialist provision. So the STIP service supports transition for children with additional needs who are referred into our service in year 6, and that those may include children with EHCPs, but it's not only children with EHCPs. There's a range of support. You know, our lightest touch would be we're maybe doing a bit of liaison between the primary and secondary, supporting information sharing, adding a kind of extra layer of support and expertise there, and at the sort of the higher end, it might be a bit of a bespoke package with some support from one of our BRSAs, which is a behaviour reintegration support assistant, who might work with a child in primary and then do some work with them once they've transitioned up to their secondary. That'd be sort of the higher level of support we would offer. Sometimes we also work training and directly with schools to help them support transition of their young people, transition groups. Some schools will set up their own transition groups, so we'll often facilitate and support that as well.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you so much. And I guess the question that we do hear from families quite a lot is how can they, as parents, support their child at home during this period? Because I think you can feel sometimes as a parent, you sort of see this, you know, massive change, and you think, what can I do at home to, you know, to make it easier for parents, but mainly, you know, of course, for the child as well.
Yeah, definitely. That is a huge topic. I could probably go on for about an hour and a half, so I'll try and keep relatively brief. One of the things that we've found when we've asked children what they want from their parents in being supported in transition is they always say they want their parents to know more. You know, what they found difficult was when they asked their parents didn't know the answer. Now, obviously, we all know that all parents can't know all the answers to everything. It's an impossible job. But keeping yourself informed in terms of things like open days, when open days are happening, that sort of information is really important. Parents themselves are often really anxious about the transition, and it's really important. I'm not asking people to just sort of suppress all their feelings, but it's really important that that anxiety isn't shared with your child. I think we often underestimate sometimes how our own feelings about our own experiences at school can kind of bubble up again at times like this. And it's really important that any anxieties that are actually for us as parents, we don't necessarily share with the child. One of the things that can really help with that is making yourself really familiar with the school's website. Once you know what school your child is going to, look at the website. They are sometimes quite daunting because there's an awful lot of information on there. So I would say don't try and read all the information at once, because that's quite a challenge. But there's so much information regarding policies, around things like uniform, mobile phones, attendance, behaviour. And the more information that you have and you're familiar with, the better equipped you're going to be to support your child. You can also look at the SEN report for the school to see how needs can be met and what they have on offer. And again, if there are parents watching this who are at maybe in year 5 or just starting to think about choosing schools, that would be information they might want to be asking questions about if they go and visit on an open evening. The other thing I would say, and I'm going to come back to this again, is around communication. So if you have a concern that your child's going to find something challenging or might need some adjustments to be made, please make contact with the SENCO or the head of year 7 or pastoral lead sooner rather than later. It is much better to have a plan in place than cross your fingers and hope for the best. So if, for example, your child struggles with organisation, or you struggle with organisation yourself, think about having things like checklists and timetables. Make sure that you and they know what resources they're going to need. The organisational challenge of going to a large secondary school is often a big shock for everyone. If you know your child struggles with things like recording homework, flag that up in advance so it doesn't become a bigger issue. And the last one I would say is be realistic in how much contact you might have with their teachers. At primary school, you might feel that you can have a word with them every day at the gate. You might have a head teacher in a smaller school who's very responsive to every email. A large secondary school, you're probably not going to have as much contact. So if you know that that's something you're going to be perhaps a bit worried or anxious about, like I said, reach out to the SENCO, reach out to the head of year, and find out who the person is who you need to be making contact with.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And actually, it's really interesting. I did a recording with the ex-SENCO who's now working for SAFE, which is the I can't remember, schools more excellence. Thank you. I always forget that. I can always remember SAFE, and what he was really emphasising was that communication and preparation and all those kind of things that that sort of pre-thinking things almost, to know what to expect. So that's really useful. Thank you. And I guess the next question is really the same thing, is what can parents do if they're concerned about their child, and how they're going to manage.
I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, but it's back to that communicate. If I could say one thing in capital letters, it is communicate. It's really key. And get in touch with both the primary SENCO and the secondary SENCO. Find out who the head of year 7 is, find out who the head of pastoral support is. I'm not saying email all of these people all of the time, but if you know who your key people are, that will really, really help you. And nipping problems in the bud is a lot easier than trying to pick something up when things have started to wobble a little bit. Yeah,
absolutely. It's the earlier the better, really, isn't it? Before things get embedded, is really, really important. So if a child doesn't currently have involvement from STIPS, but a parent feels that it would be helpful, how would they go about getting that involvement?
So we don't take referrals from families. We are a school-based service, so they would need to make contact with the SENCO at their primary school and have a discussion with them. SENCO might agree that a referral would be appropriate. However, a lot of schools do have really robust transition arrangements in place, and the SENCO may feel that actually the arrangements they have in place already are sufficient, but parents can absolutely ask. And just to sort of reassure parents, all of our schools do consult with us on a cohort level about how children can be supported. So although, for example, a named child may not be referred to us, we may do a clinic with the year 6 teachers where we talk about children on an anonymised basis about how they can support children through the transition. So even if the child's not referred to us, they will be getting the benefit of support through the school process.
Brilliant. No, that's really, really good to know, actually. Really, really useful. And I guess just thinking about those children who, and those families who'll be watching and their child has maybe just started in year 7 and is really, really struggling, and the transition hasn't gone particularly well. What can they do if they're in that sort of that stage?
Yeah, so I'm going to say it again, it's that communication. It's going, I would say it is making those, make that phone call to the school, to the SENCO, to the head of year 7, to the pastoral lead. There's actually quite a wide range of people. In primary schools, it's often just the SENCO who will be your point of contact, but there may be more people in a secondary school who would be appropriate for you to contact. And I think it also depends on why you feel your child's struggling. Is it something that's universal? Are they struggling with a skill like organisation, in which case the SENCO might be able to support them with some strategies? Are they struggling with particular members of staff? Something a lot of children find really difficult is suddenly being taught by maybe 7 or 8 different people, all who have very different personalities. And that's a big change from being taught by one quite predictable person every day at primary. And actually, if it's something like that, there may be particular teachers that the SENCO wants to have a conversation with. If it's something like their attendance and they're being late, actually, did you practice the journey with them? Because are they enjoying that bit of freedom that they now walk to school by themselves and getting waylaid by the sweet shop, because that seems like a fun thing to do. So depending what the need is, depending what they're struggling with, I would say we'll steer who you need to speak to.
Yeah, it is. It's a massive change, isn't it? Going, I always think that you go from your one teacher in primary to, like, goodness knows how many teachers each day. So it will take time, won't it? Yeah. I mean, I think for any child transitioning, there is that period, whether you've got additional needs or not, is that, there will be that time where it's all very, very different.
Yeah, definitely.
What types of things are done in school to support a child with transition, and when would this start? So thinking about, I guess, at primary school, what kind of things are done, and when would that happen?
So there are things like the open days and visits, and I know over the last few years that's been very interrupted because of COVID, obviously, but as far as I'm aware, the plan is this year for everything to sort of go ahead as normal. So those are sort of the main day when they visit. Primary schools almost universally, in fact I probably would say universally, are going to be doing work with their year 6s. It's sometimes whole class sessions, it's sometimes in groups around transition, about what that change is going to look like, about the different expectations, answering their questions, giving them strategies, talking about organisation, timekeeping, all of those sorts of things. If you've got a child who we think might need a little bit more support, there might be some additional visits to their secondary school. They might have an opportunity to go in a smaller group, or even an individual visit. Maybe if a child does have an EHCP, sometimes they have an opportunity to visit with a staff member in a separate environment. One of the things that can also be really nice, because the environment is so different, you're sometimes going from quite small buildings to absolutely enormous buildings. I mean, there are schools that I go into in secondary schools and I still can't find my way around. I've been working for Surrey for years. And actually for some children, going around the school when there's no one else there after the school's closed for the day can be really useful. can be really fabulous with that. I've had heads of year 7 done video tours, because obviously that's a nice thing the child can go back to and refer back to over the summer. Things like transition books that they can complete themselves and keep over the summer, because actually it's a long time. You can forget everything you did in your transition course by the time it gets to September. Once they get to secondary school, there's a whole range of different things. So, there's things like lunchtime clubs, because a lot of children find those experiences of unstructured time with suddenly all of those much bigger children. All of a sudden you go from being the biggest child to suddenly the smallest child.
Yeah.
And they all look very small in September with their big blazers on.
Yeah.
So that can be a little bit intimidating sometimes for some children. And lunch clubs and things like that are widely available at a lot of our secondary schools. Things like homework clubs. I know that some parents have a real battle with young people over homework, because they don't really want, school and home's home.
Yeah.
Actually, homework club can provide a really nice way of saying, well, school's just a little bit longer, and we'll do the homework there. Having key name staff for that relationship building. So you've got someone to check in with at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. For a lot of children, their form tutor will be sufficient. For some children, they might need someone to check in a couple of times, a day with as the day goes on. So it very much depends on the school and the child, but that's just a bit of a flavour.
Yeah, no, that's really, really useful advice. And I think the homework one particularly, I can speak for my own children, they really struggle to separate the two, home and school. And it's that, homework club in a lot of cases is that, it's still at school, but you're still doing your homework. So, it's the best of both worlds. So that's a really good tip. Thank you so much. Thank you. You've both answered so many questions, but Emily, is there any other advice that we haven't covered that you can think of that you would like to share with families at this point in their journey?
I think it's that: be prepared, do the research, practice the journey, work out the lunchtime arrangements, because in primary school it's very easy. You go to a room and either you've got a packed lunchbox or they give you food. It's a lot more complicated at secondary, and I think every year there are lots of children who spend all of their lunch money on day one because they fancied 4 paninis and 3 packets of crisps, and then come Tuesday they suddenly realise that there's nothing there for them to buy. Read the policies, get the uniform. That it is difficult, but if there is going to be a problem with the uniform, if your child has sensory issues around something on the uniform, have that discussion before the summer holidays. So you're not then sitting there blind in August going, oh, am I going to be okay with them in track pants or not? Make yourself well informed, and talk about any worries your child has. Give them that opportunity to share those worries. Some of them, are genuine worries, and it's okay to be worried. We all worry about things that are scary and different, or we consider to be scary and different. And the more you communicate, the more you'll realise. And I'm just going to finish with a tiny little anecdote. I remember running a lovely transition group for a group of children. We were very enthusiastic, and we were at the secondary school, and the bell went. And one of the little guys I was working with said, I can't wait for secondary school, because every time the bell goes, I'm going to choose PE. I love PE. And it was a heartbreaking moment when I had to explain to him that, yes, there are lots of lessons, but you don't just get to choose what you want to do every time the bell goes. So just a misunderstanding. But lucky we figured it out then rather than in September.
No, absolutely. Oh, thank you so much, both of you, for your time. I think this has been really, really useful, and we've covered so much. And you're both very kindly have offered to come and do a session later in the week for us. It's going to be on Thursday, the 17th of November at 12 o'clock, I believe. Yes. So we will join you all then. But thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. We're really looking forward to doing the further session this week. So any questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll get to them.
Yes, absolutely. And just to add, we are going to have a email that we'll attach to this that you can send in any questions prior to the Q&A session. Thank you so much. Thank you.